I'm going to open the questions and answers, and Mara is going to help us moderate the questions. So Mara, if you want to take it from there.
Yeah, Ellen, can you ask your question about the role of vision?
Sure. Thanks so much. That was great, Elise. I love that. You certainly are passionate. Comes through clear. So I'm a vision professional, director of CBI project at Perkins. And, you know, anytime we have a child with a stroke, we always want to screen for, did a visual processing center get impacted? And certainly we want to look at facial recognition. We want to look at the amount of facial regard. We want to look at visual attention. So, you know, and this is where I think we all cross over, right? We all need to be in teams to really, because all we have is behavior. What does it really mean? So does that get screened when you have children that you work with executive functioning? Does their ability to understand faces or facial expressions or any of that get screened sort of before a diagnosis?
Ellen, it's a fantastic question. Thank you for articulating it so well. It's a complicated answer because our diagnostic channels are so complicated. I think that what I will say is when we are working with an individual, because we are so invested in this executive functioning lens, we want to talk with speech and language pathologists because a speech and language pathologist could do a very specific facial recognition assessments and subtests and evaluations. The other, and I think more and more we are getting better about looking to vision or I guess vision professionals, ophthalmologists, you know, that whole field, and saying, what can you tell us about this individual's perception? Because if we just look at the behavioral lens, it's funky. So a concrete example I have of this was a student who was struggling with reading, and he was diagnosed with dyslexia. But what we watched is that when he was reading, his eye gaze was bouncing all over the page. And so then it turns out with some pretty intensive eye tracking therapy, caught right up. So I think we're getting better as we really lean in to the recognition that we have to be multidisciplinary teams. I think we're getting better. Is it, a lot of neuropsychologists are really good about having it be something that they look for, something that they encourage the family to pursue if there's any question there. I don't think it's tight just yet, but I think we're moving in that direction, and I keep advocating for it, and I'll do the same.
Wonderful, thank you.
Thanks. Emily asked a question, and I think Kayla's interested in this. Are either of you able to frame that?
Hi, this is Emily. I'll share. My son is only 5, and so we're just starting to, you know, with him being 5, age restrictive on his abilities to be aware of social functions and things like that, with just him being 5, but also him having neurological affectedness. Anyway, just curious of where can I find resources to help to aid him in this development, and where can I learn how to best support him? This is the first webinar I've ever attended about this subject, so I'm anxious to learn more. Where can I find those resources?
This is where people love me or they hate me. Full transparency, because I think I could certainly direct you to general social competency resources, like Jessica Kingsley Publishing is great. Michelle Garcia Winner's Social Thinking, she has a one for little guys called Superflex, and We Thinkers. Those are really good starting points. What I will say is that this is again a love or hate situation where I really like to get to know an individual so I can then tell you what I think a good starting point will be. So one thing is, reach out to me and we can certainly have another conversation. Jessica Kingsley Publishers is great. I also just really love teaching kids about the brain, because that knowledge is never going to let them down. And it's not, while it will evolve in a forward thinking sense, it's knowledge that they can then rest other content on top of. So there's great books online. There's a fantastic National Geographic series called Brain Games that would be a little, he'd have to watch it with you if he's 5. But I honestly think a starting point if we're going to make social competency as accessible and targetable as possible for kids, maybe start thinking about the brain and the parts of the brain. And this part does this. There are a couple of other great curriculums, Brainwise, The Mind That's Mine, Mind Up. Not sure if that is, there's a lot out there, but I'm happy to talk further too.
Yeah, that's all of those great resources. Thank you very much. And thanks for the advice. I would love to connect with you offline, I guess, to learn more. How do I do that? Where do I go to reach you?
Sure. I'm going to put my email in the chat feature. And so feel free to reach out if there's any questions after today as well.
Thanks.
Perfect. Thank you very much.
Patty, I know you have to go, but I thought you might want to chime in about how, as a neurologist, you educate even young children about the brain.
Oh, yeah. And I think everybody does it differently. Dr. Pierre is working also with the perinatal strokes in the clinic. And she uses, for example, a certain app where you can see the brain is more interactive. I do a lot of hand stuff and drawings, but I think one thing that is very, very important is before you come to any explanation to anyone is ask the question, and what do they think, understand in their own words, what happened to them. And that gives them a voice, and it gives you a ton of information about what is their even emotional understanding of what happened to them. What is really difficult for a kid is to be labeled, or a teenager even more, to be labeled something they completely not identify with. So I think starting with questions is really helpful. I start, honestly, as soon as I see the kids starting to really be totally in the conversation that we are in, and that can happen very early, like 6, 7, 8 years of age, I start being very mindful of the way that I talk about them. Not as if they are not in the room, but as if they are really part of the conversation. And I try to bring them in as much as we can. And then definitely 3rd grade and above, if they're able to express themselves, I do want to hear what they think. And it is, as you follow them over life, you see how they embrace what happened to them. And today in the audience, we have some of my patients that were pre-pubertal, or like 8, 9 years of age, and they're now in college. And there's a completely different sense of yourself. We all have that. So I think you can't just start, oh, this is a stroke and it happened like this and you got this, and then you are going to have trouble with this and that. And it's like, who are you talking about? That's not me. And also it would not let you connect with what they fear, what they understand. Sometimes there are a lot of conceptions that were taught by others, or their own interaction with other peers, that are wrong, that you would not know that they're in their heads if you're not talking to them. And then as soon as they become teenagers, I kick the parents out of the room. At some point during the encounter, I do want the teenager interview, the ability for them to say something they don't want their parents, or feel comfortable, or ask questions in private and have a relationship. And that is part of what is protected under our oath of privacy to the patients. So I don't know if, Mara, this is more or less what you were referring to, but I think that we have to give them more and more protagonism in the visits, in the medical community, so they also start feeling part of a team that is working with them. It gets really stigmatizing to come to medical appointments where they treat you as if you're not in the room. So we try to avoid that very much. I'm gonna have to leave you guys today a little bit before I wanted, but just wanted to thank everybody for keeping these workshops, for the participation, and also for helping us extend the effort to other communities. And as the month of stroke awareness ends, I think we still have a big mission, which is to reach out and extend our hands to people that don't have access, to people like Lise and the professionals that we've been seeing in our conversations. And it's time for giving this space to other experts and other families. So if you guys have suggestions, we always want to hear that in the post-event survey. Thank you, Mara.
Thanks. Kayla, let's pick up with your question about how to help if your child's unaware, and also if there are other children who may have questions about your child's disability.
Yeah, so I know for my instance, my son will be 6 in June. He is also developmentally behind. So he reaches milestones, just not as quickly as a neurotypical child. And we've just always don't really treat him any differently. So we've always just kind of, let him do his thing. We don't ever try to do like, ableism. He's always just kind of, we don't treat him any different. Let him, do his thing. And so I don't really feel he knows any different between him and a neurotypical child. So when he goes to like try to play with other children, some children are fine, and then you get some children who, give dirty looks, or they'll run away, or, they'll come up to me and ask questions. And I guess I'm just wondering, he doesn't understand. And I don't know how to even explain to him for him to try to understand, and how to, I guess, correctly put it in words for younger children to understand why he may act in certain ways that they may think is, what they think is like weird or different, without, me being too like scientific-y.
Sure. I'll give a starting point, but then, Olivia and Bonnie, I'd really love to hear your experiences with this. Something that I think is important from just as a parent, as a caregiver, that I think it's important starting point is, so what you're talking about is disclosure. And a myth that I really like to support parents to release yourself from: disclosure doesn't happen at one moment. Disclosure says is the act of making other people aware of something that isn't widely known. The kids probably already know. And so there's a lot of, I think there's a lot of pressure put on parents to think that the moment of disclosure and identifying this language is like a trumpet's blaring. Either you do it right or you, and I just kind of want to pop that a little bit and say that it's going to be uncomfortably naturalistic and evolving. And I think the sooner parents are comfortable saying like, okay, we might talk about this today, and I like some of the language we land on, and then we might talk about it next week, and we're going to find better language. So give yourself comfort to, I don't want to say comfort because that might be unrealistic too, but be kind with yourself about letting yourself learn alongside your child. This is not a make or break one-time conversation. It will constantly evolve. And I would think a piece of this disclosure that I don't think is widely discussed is just personality traits. So there's personality traits are our tendencies in behavior, and everyone has them. So some of us are really detail oriented. Some of us are more impulsive. Some of us are really thoughtful. Some of us are, and this idea of personality traits, everyone has them. You want to be able to know them in yourself, and you want to be able to recognize them in other people to decide if they're a match. So I think it's okay to let personality traits be a part of the disclosure process. He's quick thinking, and so that's why he grabbed the toy out of your hand. He's detail oriented, so that's why you have to say that the truck was orange and not yellow. So Olivia, Bonnie, I'd love to hear your perspective on this.
Yeah, I have a few thoughts. I think that when Olivia was younger, I think she was missing a lot of the social cues, right? The verbal, the processing. I think her processing, kids are fast, running around a playground. There's so much communication, verbally, non-verbally. There's a lot to process. And so the idea of being able to track all of that, I think that I think that some kids noticed, and it did maybe present some challenges about being included in some activities, but I don't know that Olivia had developed that awareness until, you know, she was probably like 9 or 10 years old. So, you know, it didn't really, I couldn't have, I don't know that we were having those kind of conversations at that young of an age. And that, you know, there's so much development happening that, you know, some parts of kind of, you know, physical development is that challenging, some of the processing development. And so that suddenly if there's a leap of development in one area and then suddenly we see her maturing in another area. But, you know, Olivia was at a preschool and they had little observation booths that we could go in. It was a part of a Tufts University. And so I would see her playing at that age with the kids in her preschool classrooms. And a lot of times I would hear one of the kids say, Olivia, you know, like she had done something, they were just trying to communicate with her and she just missed the cue, you know, and maybe sometimes there was some support to give, you know, the teachers would explain it. I mean, I think Elsa did a good point of saying, how do you frame it? Of this is who this, you know, this kid is. And you know, so, but I think it came with, I think more of that self-awareness came with time. And I don't know that I don't know that I found a way to describe it to her in a way that she could have understood at that age.
So I just want to circle back to something that Patty said, because I also heard, Kayla, in your question or description that your child might not be aware of any differences. And I think using Elise's language, there are neutral ways to begin to disclose that within the nuclear family that normalize it, and then make it okay for the child to then ask questions as their understanding grows, so that there's no stigma for them or for you. And that's another way to experiment with what language works in your family and as the circle grows for disclosure. So that's just another framing to think about. And I think it's really great to start that young, because the kids aren't so aware when they're young, and you can mess up and figure out what works for you, as you know, and they're not going to necessarily be catching on that you're changing the way you say it from week to week.
Thank you guys so much. I appreciate it.
Emily also asked about early signs for needing possible support for executive functioning.
I'm not going to give a really good scientific answer because I think I'm not a diagnostician. What I will say is that executive functioning, our estimates are that it because it's a part of the frontal lobe, it's not fully developed until late 20s, possibly early 30s. So my answer to that, I could probably list off to you things my husband was doing when we were dating and he was 25 that made me go, huh, that were just because we were still learning how to be executive functioners. So there are evaluations like a brief. That's a normed formal measure that neuropsychologists and some school psychologists can give to look at executive functioning. One of the challenges of evaluating executive functioning is with these checklists is that it doesn't, or some of the tasks that a neuropsychologist or a school psychologist might have your child do. One of the challenges about those is that they happen in a vacuum. Right? So when a neuropsychologist or a school psychologist is evaluating someone, they're in a room with a preferred adult, it's one-on-one. And so it may or may not capture their executive functioning in real time in a classroom of 18 kids so parents are outstanding advocates. The world runs on parents of neurodiverse kids. And we shouldn't have it any other way. So I think if you notice that your child loses things that there is a clear system for organizing. If your child struggles to sequence 1 or 2 step directions, If your child is starting down a sequence of directions and gets sidetracked at step 2 and can't get themselves back onto step 3, these are not indicators of an executive functioning deficit. These are things that you just want to start coaching your child to be more aware of. But again, they may not developmentally be able to. I think a really good checkpoint in families is to use chore lists. So Sarah Ward, W-A-R-D, she has great, Bonnie, you're nodding. She has outstanding executive functioning resources, and I bow at her altar regularly. She has a checklist for what she considers age or developmentally appropriate chores broken down into different age ranges. And you'll notice that they change based on the number of steps, right? So 2 to 3, 4, 5-year-olds got to do 1-step tasks. 4, 5, 6, 8, 9, 10, 25, maybe they could do 2-step tasks. So I would check out Sarah Ward and some of her chore literature because it's pretty concrete. And Bonnie, you're nodding. I don't know if you want to add anything to that.
Yeah, you know, I also would bow to her offerings. And she's local to Massachusetts, though she presents, I think, nationally. You may see workshops offerings, and I would strongly suggest checking in on her. She really helps frame executive function in a way and gives concrete examples of what to do, you know, like how to support that development. So yeah, I can't say enough good things about Sarah Ward.
Great, thank you so much. Really, thank you very much. That's very helpful.
Thanks, Emily. Jordan, can you, you have a number of questions here. I want to know if you want to ask the first one, just.
Oh, I don't even remember the first one anymore.
The first one is well, pick the one that you care the most about.
I guess I really look forward to hearing more from Olivia.
Yeah, so your question was, are there any specific memories of experiences that were great and that helped you grow, like, socially? I guess, is that,
Sure, although we can expand the parameter and just like great positive things.
Yeah, I mean, I guess the things that really stand out is just getting involved any way that you can, whether that's in the community and you're going to a park and you're connecting with other parents who have children, or you're in a community group or sports. Like, that's something, I'm a very sporty person, so I spoke about basketball, but I've been involved in soccer and swimming, and that just, you know, really expanded not only the circle of people that were like me and that were thrivers, but just people like everywhere. Like, you know, they were just neurotypical, and then, you know, not neurotypical. So
what age, Olivia, when did you start doing kind of like, do you recall having these positive group activity experiences?
I mean, as I mentioned, it was really hard after I moved, because we moved away, and that was a really rough transition, connecting socially. And I think in part the community, there was, you know, there's deeper aspects of, you know, the community has really deep roots with everybody being here for, you know, 2 or 3 generations, and everybody, you know, knew everybody. So I guess I would say it really started in high school when I decided, you know what, I want to like get out there. And, you know, I mentioned being a part of like the radio station. Of course, your 6-year-olds could not, you know, probably go on the radio yet, but or like get involved in more, you know, advanced. But yeah, I guess I would say like sports or doing anything that just seems age appropriate. I don't know.
I found Olivia's kinetic, you know, so she needed to move. And, you know, through the years, she had a lot of physical therapy, and sure, that's movement in one way. But really, I saw her blossom when it was like, just get out and run on the soccer field. And, you know, pursuing something that was motivating to her and that she enjoyed doing. I think that is really when she opened up more. It was more helpful that way than, you know, she did do social, you know, groups through the years where they would come together and there were a bunch of activities. They'd be sitting around a table. And while that, I think there was some value to what she was learning, her ability to, like, you know, maybe process that and translate it to another space was a little bit more challenged. But when she was up and moving around and running around, and, you know, I saw her social development really expand, you know, especially if there were, you know, groups of people who were, you know, it was more of a, you know, a community where there was a sense of belonging for the people who were there, and not just showing up, running around and leaving at the end, you know, when there were families who, you know, got to know each other, and athletes who spent time hanging out after. It really made a big difference.
Yeah, there was an interest.
Yeah. Yeah, everybody
know,
was
common
there for
interest.
shared interest.
Yeah.
But yeah,
I have to go pick up my son, but thank you so much. And I look forward to hearing more of the Q&A from recordings. And Mara, feel free to, you know, summarize any of the other questions as appropriate.
Thanks, Jordan. Take care. Bye-bye.
Sarah, if you're still here, would you like to ask your question?
Hi, I'm actually in London, UK. I really appreciate being able to join this call. I think the one thing out of this whole year has been being able to find all these amazing resources. My daughter actually didn't have a stroke. She's 1, but she's got hemiplegia from a brain malformation. And I have another daughter who's 3 years old, and I read, you know, when she was born, I read a lot of books like by Dr. Gordon Neufeld and, you know, Alfie Kohn about getting kids to be intrinsically motivated rather than having kind of like external rewards. And I only just started reading a new book called Late, Lost and Unprepared to try and understand this whole kind of executive functioning world. And it says a few times, like, you know, try and like you know, offer them ice cream if they remember certain behaviors. You know, it's because this is all very new to me. I just wanted to understand, can you do it without having those that kind of reinforcement? You know, it's very kind of behavioralist. Yeah, so I just wanted to understand what that looks like without doing that.
Yeah.
if it's possible. Yeah.
You know, Sarah, I think at the root of your question is kind of the alchemy of parenting, right? You know, what's the just right motivator that works for us as a family, that works for me as a parent, that works for my child? One thing that maybe I could break down that might just help you figure out when do I use which one. A core part of executive functioning is being able to recognize where it is hindsight and foresight. So where am I now? And what is between me and the outcome? And so one of the reasons that tangible or, you know, extrinsic incentives can be helpful for executive functioning deficits is because it's here, it's a thing, I can see it. I don't have to hold the abstract reward in my mind. If I have to hold an abstract reward in my mind, first of all, I may not have great delayed gratification. None of us do, right? Kids just don't have that. But then also, how do I build like a theoretical roadmap between where I am now and an abstract incentive or motivator? So a core executive functioning skill is, I am here right now. This is what I want. What are the steps to get me from here to there? And then as I accomplish each step, can I stay on track and follow that plan? So for individuals with compromised EF systems, any of those pieces get wonky. So I think the recommendation to not always rely on intrinsic and abstract motivation is really important. We can't always rely on it. I think what it is about is intrinsic motivation. For me, at least, the question I have is it intrinsic or is it abstract? So I showed a chart earlier today about, you know, what you did, your thoughts, your feelings, and the outcome. If you can make the abstract concrete by showing that the outcome is tangible, it's a good grade, it's the teacher liking you so you get to sit in the chair that you want. If using a tool like that lets your child see it in a way that is more organized and more, lets them create the roadmap, then stick with the intrinsic, because you don't need to add another layer. if you are not in a situation to have this visual, or you have to give them a shorter mile marker, because what's between where they are and the actual goal is just too long, complicated, and it's bigger than their working memory, then I think working in smaller incentives for smaller pieces is important. And I'm not known for being concise, so I am going to throw one more thing out there. The other thing I'll say is tracking progress is also a tool that is underused. So what I mean by that is, if your child is here and the goal is here, literally showing them like those fundraising meters, right? You just did this, I'm coloring it in. You just did this, I'm coloring it in. You just did this, I'm coloring it in, to show that they are, just their sheer effort and existence is getting them closer to the goal. So there are things you can do to concretize intrinsic motivators so that they're still on the table. And there is literature to support that individuals with EF deficits do build faster, stronger associations in a behavioral sense with extrinsic motivators. So you're never going to heavily rely on either. You're never going to rely solely on one or the other. It's always going to be a, when do I use this one? And does it work for me as a parent? Does it work for my kid? There are so many complex variables there.
So I want to chime in just to reference the previous session that we had just last week was about motor learning for an infant and for an older child learning to ride a bike. And in a motor context, continuing to find a just right challenge so that you can match the emerging skill with the possibility of supporting and fostering intrinsic motivation can lead to really accelerated motor development. So the session from last week is a really beautiful illustration of 2 case studies that show that in action. So that's not specifically with executive function, but because we're talking here about kids who have hemiplegia or who've had stroke, the motor piece is in play as well. And intrinsic motivation drives development a whole lot better than external motivation for many aspects of development. So I'm not negating what Elise said, but just sort of offering another perspective. I want to offer Nikita a chance to ask this question about mentoring social competency. Can you unmute, Nikita?
Yeah. Hello, thank you for presentation. I have 2 questions. It refers for me personally. First, because I'm also had a stroke, basically. It was more about cerebral palsy, and people say for me that about me that I have only palsy, but basically it's because of the stroke. And I have 2 questions. One question about limit of self-awareness, because my parents taught me to be aware about my own health and my own conditions and possible future conditions. But sometimes I feel like drowning in these emotions, that I could miss something or be not able to predict something or avoid something, that I'm literally like dying day by day. And it's my question, how to be self-aware at the one time, but not too anxious about like inevitable decline, that how not to live in fear that you die in day by day. And my second question also about competency without encouraging some stereotypes about normalizing, because I remember how in my country, I'm from Eastern Europe, many people said to me that you need to be like normal people, like you need to learn how to be normal. You need to like normal people has all these skills, all these professions. And I grew up with this feeling that I need to like pursue some normalizing path. I need to get a real work. I need to get a real education, and the more the better, the real profession. So I need to know about your approach, how to encourage competency without encouraging stereotypes about normalizing or ableism or something like that. For me, it's really crucial because I see the like toxic residue of both things in my own life. Now I have master degree, and I have my own daughter, and everything is fine. But sometimes my emotions really hit me hard with this toxic residue from the past. Thank you.
Yeah, I want to start off by saying just thank you, Nikita. That was so well articulated, and it was really a gift to get to hear you express such deep, vulnerable, complicated pieces of the human experience. So thank you for being willing to share that. I think that I will not be able to successfully answer your question because I don't think we know a lot about how to really build an inclusive, neurodiverse world. I think what we do need to do is listen more to people like you and Olivia, and man, I'll give you guys my megaphone any day, right? I think we need to, those of us that are in positions to influence the social culture of workplaces and schools need to turn to first person voices to get the feedback so that we can say, hey, do we really have to think about it this way, and listen to those perspectives. I think it's really important that everyone have a safe place to talk to someone about the challenge of self-compassion and the challenge of anxiety. Our world, especially with technology, it is not forgiving. It is a really tough place to constantly get so much information. We have way too much information. And our brains cannot sort through it and filter it out and let go of things as well as we would have been allowed to 100 years ago. So I don't underestimate the impact of technology in our ability to let go of things that are anxious and hard to hold on to. So I think everyone should really, and this is hard to find, but make sure that you have someone in your life, a professional that can help you sort out what are the thoughts that are triggering these feelings, and then how do we pull those apart a little bit so that you can get some relief that is very due to you. Some of these are kind of unsolvable situations, and how can we as humans be more compassionate with each other and create a more compassionate world where we let challenging situations exist and support each other through them. So Nikita, that was not the clearest answer I could give. I want to thank you. And I will say I'll take what you've said and bring it forward into my work with schools and businesses as well.
Thank
Olivia,
you.
Bonnie.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, you talked about, having people normalize you. I think when I was working, so I mentioned that I worked part-time when I was in community college. I worked at Panera, which is like a fast food. It's like a luxurious, you said you're in Europe, so I don't know if you have any Panera. I don't think you would have any Paneras over there, but it's like a luxurious fast food restaurant. So I didn't disclose my disability to them, which I think for me, it's really hard to disclose because there's just so much judgment, I think, on my part to be, to say to somebody, oh, I had a stroke and this is what, I'm completely, limited, or I'm partially limited on my left side of my body. They can do with that what they want. So I just didn't disclose to them, but as a result of that, they kind of discovered like, oh, they were kind of picking up on cues of like, oh, she's only using her right hand. She's only, she kind of sometimes walks with a limp. But as a result of that, there's a specific example of me like sometimes in the beginning when I was working there, because I worked there for 5 months, they said, they were like, oh, they didn't have me cutting bagels, which is, typically that's, you're cutting it horizontally, and that would be normally a challenge, but they had, like, that's how I cut bagels, but they had a bagel guillotine, which is like you put it down and then you just cut. So it's like almost like a placeholder for the bagel. So they were like, oh no, you don't have to do that. And I was like, well, I can do that because that's something easy that just requires one hand, and it really doesn't necessarily put me in any jeopardy of like, oh, I'm going to chop my hand off. But so when you're talking about like having people normalize you, I can't necessarily recall a memory where people would be like, well, you're doing, you're going to have to do things like everybody else is doing. So I don't know if you have a specific, you have a better memory of.
I just want to validate, what Nikita said is that ableism permeates so much of our cultures, collectively, right? So, and hopefully that awareness is growing, and the empowerment of individuals with disabilities is emerging, and this idea of inclusion benefits everyone. It not really I know I idealize this a little bit, but the idea of seeing differences as a benefit and, how it enriches, all of us. But, we still have a long way to go. And, I hope that, as, Elsie said, that you can connect with someone that you could talk to about that.
Thanks. I appreciate the circling back and hearing from everybody on that. I think we'll close. We're past the 90-minute mark. I want to thank again Olivia, Bonnie, and Elise. Thank you all. And this recording, as well as the previous 9 sessions, will all be up on our YouTube channel. So we'll be sharing those recordings and encourage you to come back for future sessions. Our next one is planned for June, and then July, and then we're going to have a break. So thanks, and have a great afternoon or evening, depending on where you are. Thanks. Bye.